Welcome to this podcast on internal audit. My name is Silvia Puhani. The podcast Interne Revision souverän, kollegial und wirksam is usually in German. But today I have a very special guest with whom I'm doing an interview in English. So, sorry folks, this podcast will not be translated to German. It will be English only. My guest today is Larry Harrington. He is from IIA Global. I met him in Salzburg at the Austrian IIA conference. There he held a keynote on internal audit and disruptive technology. So we had a little chat about it then in Salzburg, and it was very great. And then we decided to do a podcast. So in this podcast, we will be speaking about the future of internal audit. Please enjoy. Welcome, Larry.
It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Yes, I'm so proud to have you from IIA Global on my podcast on internal audit. So thanks very much for coming.
Well, I want to thank you because as internal auditors today, we talk about the importance of communication and ongoing learning. And you are doing both. By doing these podcasts, you are servicing the internal audit profession by sharing information and giving people an opportunity to learn from others. So you're a valuable member of the internal audit community, and we appreciate all that you do.
Thanks very much. That's very nice of you to say that. So please give us a little idea how you came to become an internal auditor.
Well, I started my career very early in public accounting. And after becoming a certified public accountant, I was looking at alternative positions. And a fellow that I used to work with had left the firm to become a recruiter. And he called me one day about an internal audit position. And back in those days, internal audit didn't have the reputation it has today. And so I said, no, I don't think I'd want to do internal auditing. And he talked to me a little bit more about this particular company and the fact, what did I have to lose by doing an interview? So I went for the interview and realized that internal audit could be a pretty exciting opportunity. And I've spent most of my life in internal audit, although I've left the profession a number of times to become CFO of a business operation, to become vice president of human resources, to become vice president of operations. But I've come back to internal audit many times because what I've realized is internal audit sees every aspect of the company. You see the company from a perspective that no other position does other than maybe the CEO. And it gives me an opportunity to interact with every level of the company and to really drive positive change with a sense of urgency.
You have a real passion for internal audit. I like to hear that.
Well, thank you. It's an exciting profession, and at the global level, we spend a lot of time today trying to reach out to people younger in their career to understand how valuable internal audit experience would be. And for many people that I've worked with over the years, like myself, they've left internal audit and come back at a higher level. I would tell you that the times that I left internal audit, I learned how to be a better internal auditor because I learned the operation. And when I was in public accounting, I'm maybe a year out of school, I can remember a senior manager sharing with me one day. He said, Larry, the most important thing to learn about auditing is business. If you understand business and you understand risk, you can go far. We can teach anybody how to audit, but it's hard to teach people business acumen. It's hard to teach people risk. And so early on, he said, two of the elements that he would recommend that I focus on is understanding all aspects of business, from human resources to operations to finance to IT, and that I understand risk. And I've never forgot that conversation because in any position I've been in, including internal audit, those are key elements of success.
Yes, I believe that as well. And when I started in internal audit, this was as well a question of how does a company work? So how does it really, really work? And then you spend the time in internal audit and think, okay, now I might have figured it out. And then there is a tipping point, and then you ask yourself, well, why the heck does it work anyhow? That's my experience. Was it the same with you?
Yes, it is. But, the exciting part for me, and this is what is so important about our profession, is when you study internal auditors, they're like engineers. Most seem to be introverts. And yet to be successful, you have to be comfortable with people. You have to be comfortable with networking. You have to be comfortable with conversations with people. And so in order to learn the business, something simple like payroll, I can remember in my first payroll audit, I had never done payroll before, but by asking the right questions, by listening to what they say and asking the right follow-up questions, it gives you insight into a business. And what I have found over the years is when someone's doing the same job for 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 years, it's hard to be innovative. As an internal auditor, you've seen many different ways of how things are done. You've seen many tools and techniques. So when you really listen to what the person has to say, you can often come up with suggestions on how to enhance the process, how to simplify the process. So often, the successful auditor is listening. So what is your biggest problem? What is your biggest aggravation? If you could change anything in this process, what would you change? And often the person will tell you all those things, but they've never been empowered, or they're not at the right level to drive the change. As an internal auditor, people look at you differently. So you can take some of their feedback and you can rise it to the level where management listens and makes that change. And you can make positive change happen by listening to what others have to say. And that's an acutely important skill for internal auditors, the ability to listen and ask really good follow-up questions.
And I believe that this skill will be more important in the future because of the complexity of our world.
Well, you're so astute, because not only that, but as the world is changing at light speed, when you think of artificial intelligence, you think of blockchain, so many things that are happening. As an internal auditor today, we have to know so much more than we did 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. And so there also has to be this passion around continuous learning, because we have to keep ahead. As companies are trying to drive change, numerous studies, including one a few years ago from IBM, CEOs were most worried about their ability to drive change, to simply keep up with change, not get ahead of it, just to keep up. And that they didn't feel they had enough people around them who understood change management and understood how to effectively keep moving the company forward. And so as an internal auditor, what a great opportunity to help supply chain or help finance or IT really drive things forward. We have a unique perspective in the company. And if we can keep our skills current, and then we can coach and advise and audit those in the business, we can help them drive change. And a CEO, he or she can look to internal audit as the change agents and the exciting people who can pull some of these pieces together, help people communicate that don't always communicate, collaborate who don't always collaborate, and work through some of those political barriers.
That's very beautifully put. I like that very much. And I believe that the question is as well, if you have the opportunity to speak with management levels, for example, at the kickoff discussion or the exit discussion, then you have those people and you can ask them questions, even in the kickoff or at the exit, where you ask them, and so they get to reflect. And perhaps they come up with better things they haven't thought about in the future, because the process of an audit takes some time. And so you go to them, ask some questions, and go back and forth. And over time, you can develop on both sides. The auditor doesn't have to know everything, I believe, but he has to have some certain knowledge and understanding. But in asking the right questions, there could be a mutual learning experience.
Well, you raise another very interesting point, and that is, at the opening conference, people generally fear internal audit.
Yeah,
People
yes.
They're not saying, please come in and audit and stay longer and do more. And so one of the things we do is we have a brand image. We have a brand and an image issue that we have to deal with. We have to help people understand that we're the good folks, that we understand what the business is trying to achieve. We understand what they're trying to achieve. And we're there to help the business and them be successful. And so part of that is creating a brand or an image where people, you could call it the likability factor. Internal auditors are not generally liked until people get to know that we really are there to add value. And so one of the things that I've always told and advocated for is in the opening meeting, don't just start with the audit and what we're going to do. Let's get to know each other. And so we do often an opening package material on each person. So as an example, maybe that when we present you as part of the audit team, you talk about the fact that, you play clarinet, or that other kinds of things that are unique to you. Who are you? And what we find is when we present to our auditee kind of who we are as people, often say, oh, you played clarinet? So did I. And then you two start talking about what it was like to play clarinet. And now you've built a relationship that we're people with the same goals and objective to help them be more successful. And unfortunately, too often, internal auditors get right into the business. And what you learn in networking is not about what you can do for me. It's what I might be able to do for you. And so we have to kind of reframe some of the thinking in our profession to get people thinking about, how do I disarm people? How do I help them not be afraid of internal audit? How do I create an environment where they invite me in when there might be a problem instead of waiting for an audit to be scheduled? Because if people truly trust that we're positive people whose only goal, we don't get paid by the number of audits, we don't get paid by the number of findings. Ultimately, in most companies, our success is being able to create that positive change. And our success is measured as well by customers calling, saying, Sylvia, I need you to come in and look at something. I think I might have a problem, because they trust you. And when people trust you because of your knowledge, because of your experience, because of your positivity, they'll invite you in to help them solve problems. And that's how we become successful, because it's hard to know everything. But when people trust you and they invite you in to talk about the problem, that's when your skills become so important. But if you're not invited to the dinner, how can you enjoy the meal?
That's a very good statement, yes. It's in German there would be the expression Eulen nach Athen tragen, so carrying the owls to the temple in Greece.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a similar English expression there as well. So you're speaking out of my heart. Thank you very much. And yes, you talked about some of your experiences in internal audit. Was there anything unusual or very memorable you would like to share?
There's so many different stories that I could share, but one of them that I would share with you is very early on in my career. I worked for a fella who joined internal audit very late in his career. He'd been in finance and treasury, and he'd been in tax. And then he was asked to move in to run internal audit. And I learned a lot from him, because he's the one who really helped me think through the fact that as an internal auditor, we needed to create a brand. We needed to create an image. And so one of the things that I often have shared over the years is that same advice. And I'll ask a chief audit executive, or I'll ask an internal audit department, what is your vision? What is your mission? What do you stand for? And if I would go into your company and ask 100 people what they think of you or what they think of internal audit, what would they tell me? And, often we'll go like, I don't know what they would say. But, if you were the brand manager for Coca-Cola or the brand manager for other products, you understand what it takes to drive brand success. And so this person really helped me focus on how do we create the right brand. And so most of my career in internal audit, I've tried to advocate to internal auditors things like how important it is to have a career plan. Where are you today? What are your skills? Where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years? What skills will you need at that point in time? Where are the gaps? How are you going to fill those gaps in? And you find things like someone will say, well, I don't have experience in this area, and the company just doesn't seem to want to give me that experience. And maybe it's a system development life cycle. I've never been involved with putting in a new system, and I think that'd be important. Well, there are lots of nonprofit organizations struggling for volunteers. And so maybe find one that's putting in a major system development and you volunteer to help them. And then you'll get that experience. And so it starts with a written career plan. And then things like, what is your personal brand? Do you know what it is? Create a brand statement for yourself so that you can focus on the kinds of things that you want to be known for. I often tell people about the importance of reading business books on leadership. Understand who some of those great leaders have been and learn from them. They didn't all succeed. They failed many times. They learned from the failures. And so one of the things that as you're creating your brand, you often think about someone you worked for who you really liked, and maybe someone who you worked for you didn't really like. What is it about the ones you liked? What were the skills? And the ones you didn't like, what were the habits that they didn't like? How do you learn from them? And if you don't focus, it's no different than a business. I've described, this person said to me, Larry, early on, you are a business. You have one product. It's you. And you only have one customer. It's your current employer. That's a pretty high-risk business. And so he talked about creating a personal strategic plan so that I could build my skills, build my customer base. Part of the customer base is building relationships. It's networking. And so, there's so much that an internal auditor can learn if they think of themselves as a business. How do they market that business? How do they do product development for that business? How do they do execution for that business? And so I learned early on about the importance of thinking of myself as a business and how would I grow that business to be more successful.
Wow, this is great. And what's your role now in IAA Global? How did you end up with them? Because you're very, very very much advocating for internal audit as a profession. It's the best job you could have. Yep. So how did you end up with IAA Global? Was this in your written career plan?
Well, it was, and I started out at the local level, the Greater Boston chapter. I got involved, in the year I got involved and joined the board, we were technically insolvent as a chapter. We had lots of liabilities and no assets. And so the first thing I did is help the chapter understand what we needed to do differently to raise revenue. And they put me in charge of learning. And so I put together learning programs that included partnering with the big internal audit firms. And we started getting them to host the monthly sessions. So I didn't have any cost. And I could charge a nominal fee and start to build revenue. We convinced Global that we could hold a conference in Boston. And so over a 2-year period, we went from being insolvent to being very healthy financially. And then I was asked to join one of the global committees. And I worked on a committee, and then I worked my way up to chairman of that committee. And then I was asked to join the North American board and became chairman of the North American board, and then asked to join the global board and became the global chairman of the IAA. I served at the global board for nearly 10 years. And the way that works is you time out after a certain period of time. So I became the global chairman, and then you have 2 more years after that as past chairman and past chairman, and then you end up leaving the executive committee. So today, I serve on the nomination committee, and since the IAA has approved a restructuring, which dramatically reduces the number of board members, being on the nominating committee is absolutely critical because the future leaders of the global board have to be selected through the nominating committee. So it still gives me an opportunity to influence the global side of things. But as you know, I also do a lot of speaking still around the globe. And after I was with you in Salzburg, I was in Colombia, South America speaking. And it just so happens that, we're doing this on a Sunday. And then Monday, tomorrow, I'm flying to Dallas, Texas to give a speech to a group of internal auditors who are chief audit executives. And then after that, I'm going down to Global and doing a webinar next week on career development and talent management. And so I still stay very active in outreaching to the community of internal auditors and trying to spread the message I also do personal coaching. I don't charge for the coaching, but I have lots of people that I spend time with. I spent an hour with someone yesterday, as a matter of fact, just trying to help them think through some tough decisions that they're facing. And so at the end of the day, much like you're volunteering your time to do this for the profession, I end up volunteering a lot of my time. And when sometimes people say to me, well, why do you do that? I've told people in my entire life, I get my energy from people. And when I can help someone or coach someone or help them think through a difficult situation, it's exciting for me. And when I look over my career, I was at a speech probably about 2 years ago, and there were 10 people in the audience who were chief audit executives who worked for me at one time. And it was so exciting. They all came up to me afterwards and said, do you realize to see so many chief audit executives and for them to reflect that I helped a little bit, in their career development. That's what's exciting, to know that you're making a difference and to know that for someone like yourself, how many people you reach with these podcasts. And you may reach people that you've never met and you may never met, but those people might be talking about you a year from today or 10 years from today because they listened to one of your podcasts and got a message that helped them make a major change or help them be more successful. And they'll think about you without you even knowing that. And to me, that's what's exciting, to be able to speak to, whether it's 2,000 people at a global conference or 40 people at a small conference, to be able to share thoughts and ideas and hopefully engage them, maybe excite them, develop some passion, but more importantly, help them through to be more successful in their career. That's what's exciting.
Wow, yes. So you're very active and you were responsible for the learning and development. So what is your perspective on the future of internal audit?
It's a fabulous question. The future of internal audit is bright. It's as bright as it's ever been, but we are also at a crossroads. When I look at the average internal auditor today, they spend less than 80 hours learning, and most of that learning is on how to be a better internal auditor. To me, what's happening today is businesses changing at light speed. When you think about robotics, when you think about automation, when you think about artificial intelligence, when you think about all the changes that are going on in this global world, the skill set we need is immeasurable. I mean, just think about, it was a few years ago we were talking about cyber and how we really needed to get better with cyber. Well, that was only moving at 60 miles an hour. Now the world's moving at 100 miles an hour. And as internal auditors, we have an opportunity. Boards are petrified about risk, the emerging risk, the impact on their business. And they're saying to internal audit, what are those risks? What do we need to do? What should we be concerned with? What should we be asking? Boards are coming to internal auditors for advice and counsel. Management's coming to internal audit for advice and counsel. I would tell you that at Raytheon, where I worked, we had two major departments, supply chain and shared services, that both were embarking on using artificial intelligence and bots to take dramatic costs out of their systems, at the same time improve efficiency. And when they went out to bid, each person bidding for the work, and both of those organizations said, you must have two people to partner with you if you're going to be successful. First, you need to have human resources, because with the changes you're making, and if you look at the projections, 50% of the people in jobs today will not be needed to do that same job in the next 10 to 15 years. And so there's going to be a major revolution in work. And so you need HR involved to help with that. And then they said you need internal audit involved, because they're experts in change management and process. And if you could process 100 transactions in an hour, you could make 100 mistakes in an hour. But now with what we're going to do, if you can process 10,000 transactions in an hour, then if you don't have that done right, if you don't have the right controls in place, you could make 10,000 errors. And so today, people are looking to internal audit to be involved and engaged, and that means we are more important than ever before, but it also means that our knowledge, our skills in technology, advancing technologies and people skills, and the ability to ask great questions, the ability to communicate, the ability to do the kinds of things we need to do is even greater than it's ever been. And that's a challenge because there aren't enough good internal auditors in the marketplace today. And people too often are looking in the same place. And so what I have focused on over the last number of years is how do we as internal auditors stop this internal vision that we're only looking at internal audits, and how do we take a look at finding the most talented people in supply chain or contracts or finance or IT, all of the functions who have the business acumen, who understand risk, who are good communicators. How do we find the really leading, thought-provoking people earlier in their career and bring them into internal audit? We can teach them the internal audit piece, and the advantage to them is you're an emerging leader in supply chain. Now you're going to see the entire company. You're an emerging leader in finance. Now you can see the entire company. We're taking, and at Raytheon, nearly 60% of our hires came from top talent across the company. And we were able to bring them in for a couple years using their knowledge, their risk, their experience, teach them the internal audit piece, and then spin them back out to the business as change agents who have a very different perspective. So as internal auditors, we're in great demand, but that means that there's more pressure for us to be involved, which means we need more people. But the most important thing is we need to be investing in ourselves. 80 hours is not enough. And if your company doesn't give you more than 80, then I'm urging people, invest in yourself. Take 5% of your paycheck and go to classes, get some advanced degrees, go to some of these webinars that are out there, go to seminars, get your certifications, because as the technology is emerging, our knowledge has to emerge. And we're not keeping up with that. And so my message across the globe has been, look at what's happening in the business world and understand where the gaps are. And if you can fill those gaps because you have that knowledge, you'll advance faster in your career and further in your career than anyone else.
So what I understood is that if I am an internal auditor and I want to stay in internal audit, I have to learn and myself. If the company provides, it's very good. But if not, I have to look after myself because it's my business. I have to keep up so that my business doesn't get bankrupt. So on the other hand, you have those people getting in. You seek new talents, very skilled people in different kinds of things, in business aspects or IT, and you try to get them into internal audit. So what is the relation about that? How about those lifetime auditors? Will there ever be people staying for 40 years in internal audit in the future? Or do you say, well, internal audit, this should just be a stage in your life. You can do it for 2, 3, 5 years, and then you have to move on to keep up the business skills?
Another fabulous question, and I've been asked that a number of times. And what I tell people that love internal auditing and want to be career internal auditors, you can make a career out of internal audit. You can work your way up to the chief audit executive, but it requires continuous investment in yourself. Your knowledge can't stay the same. You know, one of the challenges today is people get comfortable. I'm doing okay. They don't look outside and see how fast the world's changing, and then they fall behind. I'll give you 2 quick examples. You might have been the world's greatest telephone operator 20 years ago. That position doesn't exist anymore. And in fact, we know that the top 10 in-demand jobs today didn't exist 10 years ago. And so the world's changing so quickly that positions, the studies show that artificial intelligence will reduce 50% of the people necessary today in finance, legal, and human resources. Well, what are those 50% of the people going to do? I mean, everybody needs work, they need income. So if you aren't looking ahead and investing, then you will not be a career anything. And so no matter what career you're in, but particularly internal audit, you have to be able to advance in yourself. And the other thing that's so important today, and when I look at someone like yourself, you know, it just reminds me, so many of our younger millennials today, when I was in public accounting, I did that first year, I probably did cash 7 times and I did prepaid 7 times. You know, I just did what I was told. Today's millennial will do cash twice and say, okay, I got it. I want to do something else. And if you say, no, you have to do it 7 times, they'll go someplace else. And when you look at today in the United States, and I'm not sure how it is in Europe today, but in the United States, millennials are turning over at over 20% a year, which means that you make this investment in this young person and they leave. And unfortunately today, one of the key messages is it isn't like yesterday. Don't treat the millennial like you were treated. Today, they are more innovative, they're more creative, they've grown up on computers, data analytics are easier for them. So as a leader today, it isn't just about attracting great people, it's retaining great people. And in order to retain millennials today, and it's going to be even harder with the next generation Z, you've got to be able to give them opportunities. Let them try new things. They don't want to do the same thing all the time. Work with them to grow them. And if you create an environment where they feel rewarded, they feel recognized, they feel challenged, and they feel like they're making a difference, they'll stay. Now, maybe they only stay 3 years, but that's 2 years longer than one. And you have to think about it from a return on investment. If all the young people that work for you keep leaving, the word will get out and you'll have trouble hiring them. So as a leader today in internal audit, whether you're a manager or a director or a chief audit executive, we have to be chameleons. We have to recognize what real leadership is. And real leadership is about the golden rule. You know, the golden rule? No, it's the platinum rule. The golden rule was do to others as was done to you. The platinum rule is do to others as they would like to have done to them. And so it means being able to communicate, understanding as a young person, what are your goals? What are your objectives? What are your strengths? Where are the areas to improve? Helping them create that strategic plan and then giving them opportunities and assignments where they continue to grow, they continue to learn, and they'll end up staying. And just think about if you can improve how you hire folks and if you can improve the retention of folks, how much more stable your internal audit function can be and how much more value you can add to your organization. It's all about leadership.
Definitely, yes. So the question I would like to raise again is the future of internal audit then. The millennials, I think it seems to be very similar, although perhaps in America it's even more advanced and at a further stage. But we see the basic same things as you described. So is this the complacency of, okay, I'm doing fine? We had that 50 years ago as well, I believe. So is it just the speed? Because I think there's more change. It's not just the speed, it's the kind of communication. You know, with the millennials using social media, they have a voice and they can talk to anyone. So how does internal audit or the function as internal audit have to change so that they have the opportunity to communicate in the organization as well at different levels and not wait for the boss to give an okay to do this or that?
So you raise a very intriguing point. Today, with Glassdoor, there's lots of out there. If I'm thinking of going to work for your company, I can find out everything about your company, what everybody that works for your company thinks, and people that used to work for your company thinks about it. Social media has totally transformed the HR world. Today, HR folks can go on sites and say, how many of our people have resumes out on other sites? There's insight. And so as a business person, understanding how social media affects your business. Someone's on an airline today, and someone so we'll take Richard Chambers, who's the CEO of the IIA. He blogs, and he's probably got, 100,000, 200,000 followers. He's on an airplane, gets a bad experience, and he tweets a note. Delta Airlines or American see it right away. He can impact things. And so you raised an interesting point that business has changed because of the social media. And that means companies are reacting differently. They're working proactively to understand the social media profile that's out there, what people are saying, and they're reacting quickly. At Raytheon, probably about 6 years ago, we worked with our corporate communications folks to do an audit on social media to try to help them figure out a better way for them to keep out in front of the social media. So you raise the point because it's a business issue and it's a risk issue, but it's also from an internal audit perspective, we're a business and we have the same risk issues as a human resource or as a company does. And so today, it's important to recognize that people do have that voice, and people are going to share that information. And if you're not a great boss, that's all going to get shared. Or if you do some things that are very unique and very different, that's going to get shared. And that's going to help you. One of the things that's exciting about our profession, since the early days that I can remember, our theme has always been sharing through progress. Progress through sharing, right? We make progress when we share things. And so whether it's through a webinar or a podcast, we have people that will share what's my risk assessment versus yours. They share audit plans. We do a lot of transparency across our profession in order to help all the profession grow and be more successful. As the internal audit world changes, we have to adapt. We can't do auditing in 2019 the way we did it in 2010. And yet today, when you ask people about creativity in internal audit, they talk about, well, we have automated work papers, or we use data analytics. But today, the more advancing audit functions, they're not using data analytics to just test 100% of the population. They're using data analytics to predict the future. And, you know, I struggle because we look at some companies where there's big database in marketing, there's a big database in sales, there's a big database in engineering, there's a big database in production, and they're not talking to each other, and they're overlapping things. And so as internal auditors, we have the ability to communicate across functions and demonstrate to a company, why would you have 6 databases like that? Why wouldn't you consolidate them and utilize them and be able to pull off the same kinds of things? There's so much that we can do as internal auditors today, but it means that we have to change the skill set that will make us successful tomorrow, and we have to bring in people that will help us be successful tomorrow, and we have to improve our training so that the skills for tomorrow are being developed today. And as I said earlier, we're in great demand. The folks doing artificial intelligence want internal audit involved. The folks using bots want internal audit involved. Blockchain will have an important aspect for internal auditors. So the demand on companies to grow sales, to reduce costs, to improve cash flow, on and on, internal audit can help the company be successful. But the skill set, as you pointed out, is changing, and what we'll need is different. That it's more the soft skills will stay the same, but the technical skills are going to need to be changing, and understanding the global environment and understanding how social media interacts will be absolutely critical for business, and it'll be critical for internal audit. You hit it right on the head.
Well, then I'm very interested how you're going to answer my next question, because you said all those guys want internal audit's involvement, creating the bots and whatever. So this kind of audit would be operating on the open heart. So it's looking in the future. You have to do an audit during a Scrum project or something like that. You can't say, well, give me the files from last month and I'll look through if there is an error in it. It's a very different skill set, and I believe it's a very different kind of audit. So you can't just compare what should be and what is, but how could I set the framework correctly? So how is the governance structure of that? How are the controls set up? So you have to look into the future during your audit. My statement would be the type of audit will change, less looking in the past, more looking at the current set, or looking into the future. Would you share that, or do you think it's something else?
No, it's absolutely correct. And, you know, very early on in my career, I came across a person named Tony Robbins. And one of the things that Tony talks about is asking right questions and asking good follow-up questions. And you do that. So you remind me a lot of Tony Robbins.
Well, that's a praise. Thank you very much, because he's a hero of mine as well.
So let me answer your question. I think today what we're seeing is kind of real-time auditing. You're absolutely correct. We're not auditing things from a year ago. In other words, when someone is coming in to do they're going to use artificial intelligence or they're going to use bots, what they're trying to do, I think of it this way, it's like they're putting in a new system. And for years, internal audit has done system development lifecycle, but the average system took 18 months to put in. So you had plenty of time to kind of do your piece. Today, with the artificial intelligence, things are moving too quickly. And so what they're saying is, I need internal audit to come in, and I need you to think about what are the key controls that I need to have in place. And what are the things that could go wrong I need to think about? And I'll use an example, because internal auditors have developed this skill over a long period of time. In a company, very few people talk about fraud. Management doesn't talk about fraud. People don't talk about fraud. And yet we see from global studies, 5% of a company's revenue is lost to fraud. So internal auditors on every audit have to be thinking about what are those fraud indicators, and proactively looking to make sure the controls are in place to prevent, detect, or monitor against fraud. And so while we've developed those skills, they're the same skills when it comes to artificial intelligence and bots. What we're being asked to do is we're being asked to think through. So they're going to automate use a robot to do function A or B. We need to be able to quickly sit down as a team and think through what could go wrong, what are the key controls to have in place, where could fraud happen, and we have to, in real time, be able to give that information. That's why we started this conversation. We talked about the importance of knowing business, the importance of business acumen. This is where it comes in. If someone is in accounts payable, as an example, they're not often thinking about fraud. They've not been trained to think about fraud. As internal auditors, we have been trained to think about that. And we've been trained to think about controls in a unique way. So it gets back to, we all need to be Tony Robbins, asking the right questions. We may not know the answers, but when you sit there and you ask the right questions to the folks in accounts payable or whatever, you then have to ask the follow-up questions. And it's that dialogue, it's that communication, it's that interaction that is going to try to help us make sure we've identified all of the key controls, what could go wrong, where could it go wrong, and how to make sure that doesn't happen. And then more importantly, how do we develop the right monitoring controls so that if something did happen, we would find it very quickly and not after it's cost us a whole lot of money. So the skill set is somewhat similar, but the path is faster. Sarbanes-Oxley in the United States came about because companies lost focus on controls, and we had a lot of financial problems and a lot of fraud. And so the government kind of came back and said, you need to identify key controls and document. The public accounting firms went, well, we don't audit that way anymore. So they had to go back and rethink. Companies had to rethink. Internal auditors were asked initially in SOX, can you help us? Why? Because you understand controls. You understand key controls and how to document them. And so internal auditors for a period of time were teaching management and operating folks how to understand and document key controls, how to figure out what key controls were, et cetera. Now, we've got, I think, as a profession, maybe a little bit lazy in that respect as well. And the point you raise is now that the speed is accelerating, we've got to go back and use those same skills to help people understand what are the key controls, what could go wrong, how do you prevent it, and it's real-time dialogue and discussion. And as you pointed out, we don't know everything, but if we ask the right questions, the operating people will be able to give us the right answers. And then if we collaborate together and we use emotional intelligence and other skills collectively, we'll figure out the changes we need to make in order to improve the system.
Then I have the next question for you, because you said, well, it would be great if internal audit is asked to join such a project. So we have to earn trust, and we add value through asking the right questions. And we like to add value. It's part of the mission statement, so no problem there. But how about this thing with how do you sell then that it was part of internal audit? So that it was the added value because the internal auditor was present in that project. Because what I experienced is that if you're very humble about your role and the other part thinks, well, I came up with a perfect answer, and I know, well, internal audit asked the right questions so that the other guy came up with the right answer. So how about this thing like being humble, and how do you get that along or in line with the marketing and the selling of the added value we deliver?
You're great at asking tough questions. That's a super question.
It's my job, Larry. It's my job.
And you're excellent at it. So let me give you an example. I tell people third-party validation is always better. So if I ask you to tell me, did you have a good year or not? Oh, I had a great year. How would you rate yourself? I rate myself a 10, right? The nicer thing is when someone else sends me a note saying, Sylvia did this really well. Sylvia did that really well. Then in your evaluation, I can say, not I think you did this well. Here's what your client said about you. Now, what I tell people all the time is no one ever sits down and thinks about sending a note about how someone else was really good, because we all get busy. So the best way to get a compliment is to give a compliment. And so I try to tell internal auditors, so if we take the example you were just giving, we have a project, and let's say that you're in charge of accounts payable, and you and me and the consultants, we're talking to the CEO about this project and what we think it accomplished. I will try to find ways to make you look good in front of the CEO. I'll say things that you did that were positive or whatever. Human nature is you're going to say something to the CEO about me as well. Larry, that's really nice you said that, but internal audit was very helpful too. And so what happens is a rising tide rises all boats. So as an internal auditor, we're often criticized that all we ever do is write reports about what you did wrong. We never take the time to talk about what you did right. What I find is when I share with people the things you did well, you tend to share about the things I did well. And so to me, it's a skill set that says, as you're creating your brand, you don't create it in a vacuum. You've got to help others succeed. And you've got to, I used it, Tony Robbins once said, the difference between a floodlight and a spotlight is amazing. Most of us want the spotlight on us. I'm really good. I did this. I did that. Did you notice all this? And he talks about if you turn the spotlight into a floodlight and you share the success on a larger group of people, you'll all end up being more successful. And so it's about elevating the folks around you when they've done things well, and then they'll elevate you by telling people what you did. And I can tell you that over a 40-year career, it's worked for me over and over and over again, where I've had peers, the head of this business or that business, telling the audit committee about how internal audit made a difference. And I've also shared with audit committees and management how they made a difference. And so it's about creating that positive image where you aren't just saying I add value, you actually do add value, and the person appreciates it because one of the ways you added value is you made me look better in front of my boss. I want to make you look better in front of your boss.
But additionally, you have the aspect of the fraud issues where you have to react. You can't say, well, you did that great, embezzling of money or whatever. So you have to hold this kind of balance. When something isn't going okay, you have to tell it as well. So what's your advice on that?
So I've learned a long time ago that if you and I don't have a relationship until I come to you with bad news, that's not going to be a good situation. If, in fact, you and I have had a positive relationship and then I come to you with bad news, the positive relationship is going to be easy to accept the bad news because it's not I'm just trying to make you look bad, make me look good. It's because it's a sincere issue. So part of it is how do we communicate? How do we build the right relationships before we need those relationships? And then how do we communicate the issue? Because you're absolutely right. There's a lot of times when we have to deliver bad news. But it's how you deliver that bad news. Do you deliver it in a constructive way? Or do you do it in, if you're so busy, and I've seen this many times with internal auditors, they're so busy trying to make themselves look good at the expense of someone else. And you don't want that to be the case. But you want to be candid. You want to be direct. The audit committee today expects us as internal auditors to be candid. They need to know what they need to know. And, I'll just use a couple of examples, one in the U.S. and one in Europe. In the U.S., Wells Fargo has had a whole series of we'll call them governance issues. And in Europe, Volkswagen had a series of governance issues. The Volkswagen cost them billions and billions and billions, and the Wells Fargo cost billions and billions and billions. Now, many audit committees went to internal audit or the CEO and said, could that happen here? Why didn't internal audit at Wells Fargo know that? Why didn't internal audit at Volkswagen know that? And so what you hear a lot today is about culture, the culture at Wells Fargo or the culture at Volkswagen, and people want internal audit to do more work in culture. Now, I would challenge you in the sense that if internal audit at Volkswagen went to the CEO and said, I'm concerned about the culture here, et cetera, he wasn't going to make any changes. And the same at Wells Fargo. And so in one sense, internal audit didn't do everything that they could do, but in another sense, could they have done very much to change the culture? It's very important for internal audit to have a conversation with the board. But do you imagine at Volkswagen, if they had had that conversation with the supervisory board or Wells Fargo with the audit committee, would that have rung true? It probably wouldn't have. But the point is, let me give you another example. Cynthia Cooper. Cynthia Cooper was told by the chairman of the audit committee not to do the audit that she was going to do at WorldCom. She was told by the head of the public accounting firm there was no need of doing that. The CFO, the CEO, they all told her not to do it, and yet she did it because she knew there was a problem. And she uncovered at that time the biggest fraud, but she did it because she had courage, and she did it because it was the right thing. I will tell you about two CAEs, two chief audit executives at two retail companies, one that had a cyber issue, and they ended up firing the CEO of the company and the head of internal audit. At the other company, they had a cyber issue, but the head of internal audit had been pounding on the table for 18 to 24 months about the concerns that she had relative to cyber controls at that company. And when they had their cyber issue, what the audit committee said is, we should have been listening to her. She knew what she was talking about. She kept her job. And so to me, at Volkswagen or Wells Fargo, internal audit should have been pounding on the door saying, I'm concerned about this. And even if no one had listened, when the crisis happened, they wouldn't have been firing the head of internal audit because they would have said, damn it, we should have been listening to him or her. They knew what was going on. And so courage becomes so very important today for internal auditors to be able to speak up and feel comfortable, even if people aren't quite listening, because if you don't speak up and then the crisis happens, you're going to be blamed for it.
Yes, but this is still the assumption that somebody would have listened, or that, because what bothers me is that we don't know what happened at wherever, Volkswagen, Wells Fargo. We assume that internal audit didn't do their job because nothing changed. But what about, perhaps they said it. Perhaps they had a conversation and the board said, okay, thank you, but no thank you. Why do we as internal auditors still think they didn't do their job, they didn't have the courage? I don't know. Because we have the same assumption. So, nothing changed, so they would have done a bad job. Perhaps they did a wonderful job. I don't know it.
We don't know that, but we do know that in the other two examples I gave you, that the chief audit executive had not been advocating about cyber.
Okay.
And she lost her job. And in the other case, she had been advocating, and the board said it was our fault, not yours. She kept her job. In Volkswagen, they replaced the head of internal audit. Wells Fargo, they just replaced the head of internal audit. This other retailer, they did. So I don't know what they said or what they did, but generally speaking, if you've got proof or documentation, you've raised that issue, you've made that concern aware, you generally end up staying. When you haven't, and that's what makes it difficult here in internal audit today, because emerging risks are changing so quickly. How do you keep up with all those emerging risks? And if people aren't willing to listen, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, did it make a noise? That's a big issue today. And that's one of the things that the IA Global is put out a lot of information on emerging risks, how to communicate with the board. And they try to provide as many lessons learned as possible without having all the information so that you can think through what you want to do. And I'll give you maybe another example. As emerging risks are coming, Is internal audit spending enough time with the chairman of the audit committee or the audit committee or the supervisory committee sharing things about emerging risk? Are they sharing the II white papers? Are they sharing the white papers from PwC or Ernst & Young or Deloitte or any of the others? There's so much great information out there on emerging risks. We should be the chief educator of the board, of senior management, et cetera. And we don't have to, we can take that E&Y document or the IIA document and share that so that we're making people aware. The point is, maybe we should have got to that emerging risk 8 weeks ago. But if we've been talking about it, at least people knew it was on our risk register and we were trying to educate. Okay. And maybe from a timing standpoint, the audit should have happened 8 weeks ago and it's just scheduled for now, and that's a different issue. But that's different than if we've never had that conversation with the board on emerging risks or with management. If we've never had the conversation about what's going on with cyber and how we assess ourselves as a company, what kind of anti-cyber controls we have in place, et cetera. Or to go back earlier, when part of the issue with social media is when the head of communications came to me and said, Larry, we had lunch, we talked about social media and how it was just really having an impact. And she said, I'd like you to do this independent audit. Help me think through to make sure that we haven't missed anything. And it was right after a book was written by the Research Foundation on how to think through social media and audit social media. So I had a resource. But then as we did the review, she said, now you and I can go to the board and have this conversation. Because it isn't just her saying, I need more funds to look at this and do that. It was internal audit and collaboration. So we have real opportunities here to advance the agendas, but we have to have the conversations. And how do you have a conversation if you're not educated? Well, part of it is there are so many firms and the IA doing the research for you, doing the summary for you, writing 4, 5, 6-page white papers. You can use that and leverage that with people. But if you're not aware of those free resources, if you're not reading those resources, then how do you affect change? And so today, you're not alone as an internal auditor. The resources we have from the big accounting firms or the big internal audit firms like Protiviti and Ernst & Young and PwC and the IIA and our local affiliates, the affiliates in Germany or the UK. There's so much free information out there if we take the time to look for it, to read it, and more importantly, to share and discuss it with the board and with senior management.
Yes, and I believe the IT part is one part of it, but I'm working in a bank, and you told us before that you believe that 50% of all financial industry will be, well, perhaps gone or changed. So how do you communicate this issue of possible disruption? Because it affects everybody, and perhaps you have somebody on the board who says, well, I have to do 1 or 2 or 5 more years. So how do you communicate those things? Because people are afraid. Even the board is afraid of that.
The board is very afraid of it. The boards are afraid of it because if their biggest job is strategy. The board has to approve the strategy for the company. And if that strategy results in the company failing, then that's on the board. So in the U.S., we have something called the National Association of Corporate Directors. It's kind of the IIA for board members, so to speak. And so one of the things I've done as an auditor is I've become a member of the NACD so that I can see what they're sending to board members. And today they're sending also, you need to think about risk. You need to think about emerging risk. You need to think about cyber. You need to think, and they go through all that. And so I know what they're getting for material. So it gives me the opportunity to say, if they're worried about that because their association told them they should, what do? So then I take and I share these white papers directly with the board or directly with management. So it isn't Larry Harrington thinks this. It's I might put a small document, I might put a cover letter to say, attach this research from Ernst & Young, the IA, and Protiviti. And in each of those research documents, these are the key things that they're saying. These are the key risks. These are the key concerns. These are the leading companies as to what they're doing. I do a cover note, and then I send them the material. So that what happens is it isn't Larry Harrington predicting the future. This is firms that they're aware of, that they know, that have lots of resources, and it helps them. A number of years ago, the IA put out a document with the NACD in the U.S., and it said, we believe every chairman of the audit committee should ask these 10 questions to the head of internal audit at least annually. And we use the NACD to distribute to that. Now, we're trying to help board members be better at what they do, and this is what you should be asking the internal auditor. At the same time, we said to the internal auditor, you may be getting these questions. Can you answer these questions? How would you answer these questions if they were given to you? And so what we're trying to do as a profession is we're trying to elevate boards and we're trying to elevate internal audit. There's a relationship between the two. But ultimately, it isn't about what Sylvia thinks or Larry thinks. If we're showing creditable white paper from these other firms, it helps influence the board as to what they should be doing. So a good example is PwC puts out a state of the internal audit profession every year. I've always shared that with the audit committee. Here's what that firm is saying about internal audit as a profession. And then I attach a cover letter saying, here's how I think I match up against what they said, and here's what I need to work harder at. So in other words, it isn't, I'm really good. No. And these are the things I need to do better within my own organization. So I try to give them that balance. But, E&Y puts that out, KPMG puts out something like that, PwC, the IIA. So there's a lot of material that we can use to help them benchmark against us and how we're doing. And at the same time, if we're reading those white papers, hopefully we're getting better too.
So you're raising the bar for yourself then? You
have to. You don't want to wait for the audit committee to raise the bar for you. You have to raise it for yourself. And I learned that. At the beginning, you talked about earlier in my career. I was first introduced to Tony Robbins about 20 years ago. And he had an amazing impact on my life. He talked about personal strategic planning. He talked about marketing. He talked about branding. He talked about how to ask good questions. He interviewed famous leaders. And he used to have a series. It was a 24-month series where every month he would interview a famous business leader for an hour or so. And I would listen to those tapes, and I'd listen to what those business leaders had to say. He had a book that he wrote called Awaken the Giant Within, which he just re-released, I think, about 2 years ago. But that Awaken the Giant Within awoke a giant within me. It made me think about things in a different way. And so using other people's material can really help us grow, and it can help us change. It's no different with boards or with management. And giving them that information will help them recognize what they should be asking, what questions they should be asking, what areas should they be concerned about, and whether or not internal audit has all the right resources to audit in those areas. In some cases we don't, which is why we use co-sourcing. Because of the expertise at an Ernst & Young or PwC, we can rent some of that skill set to come in and really do the assessment.
So coming back on the future of internal audit and the complex world and VUCA and whatever, what are your wishes for internal audit? What should internal audit do?
My wishes are that internal audit helps their organization reach greater heights and greater success. And that means understanding the business goals and objectives and helping that business achieve those goals and objectives. It also means being a mirror that you can hold up to the board or to management to challenge what they're doing or to challenge the strategy or the lack of strategy or the lack of what they're doing so that they potentially think through things that are different. I would tell you that I just recently retired from Raytheon. And at my retirement dinner, the chairman of the board, the whole board was there for the dinner. The chairman of the board said to me, Larry, the most important thing is we trusted you. We knew we could count on you to tell us the truth, whether we wanted to hear it or not. And that's really important. And so if we're going to help, and I'm going to wish for the future, it's that internal audit is viewed as telling the truth, being bright, being articulate, having the acumen, and having the courage to speak up to what we need to do differently. We can help the company, the organization, whether it's profit, nonprofit, government, or industry, help them be more successful at what they do, help them serve their clients better, help them be more efficient, more effective, help them understand how the world's changing, and help them be more successful.
Wow, thank you very much, Larry. This was great.
I hope it's helpful to your audience. Again, I want to thank you for the time you spend in doing these podcasts, in trying to help internal auditors become wiser, have a better network, and do things to make a difference. It's people like you that we need more of in order to transform the future of internal audit. And what you do is a real credit, and I thank you for what you do.
Oh, thank you very much, Larry. So speaking of networking, how could people get in touch with you?
So my email address is harringtonlj, that's harringtonlj at AOL.com. And if they send me an email, I'll respond to them.
Wow. Okay. I put that in the show notes. And thank you very, very much for this interview, Larry.
Well, thank you, and you have yourself a fabulous day.
Yes, you as well. Thanks. My pleasure. Right. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you all for listening to this podcast on internal audit. This podcast is available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and on my webpage www.puhani.com. Puhani is spelled Puhani. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to share it in your audit community. Thank you for all your likes and comments on this show. It's always a pleasure. Enjoy your next audit and all the best to you. Bye.